So again, I'd like to thank Natalie and everybody at the Roberson for this opportunity. And so we can get started right in, I believe. First off, I'm introduce myself. My name's Joseph Opshinsky, Joe Opshinsky. I'm originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I'm currently living just outside of Philadelphia in Willow Grove, PA. I work in the city at a frame shop, and that's been very supportive in my work and how I can show my work and how I can display my work. And it's sort of like kind of like a home away from home in terms of how I can operate. I'm a graduate of, like I said, I'm a native of Scranton, and I'm a graduate of Keystone College, which is just kind of northwest of Scranton. It's a smaller size college in northeastern PA that had a very good art program for a number of years with a really good transfer agreement with other schools. And what that allowed me to do after 2 years at Keystone was to transfer to the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, where I went on to receive a Bachelor's of Fine Art in Painting and Drawing. And I graduated from there in 2003. Since then, I've been pretty much working steadily, just kind of producing a body of work, working on subject matter and some thematic concerns that began in school and just have kind of fueled what I've been working on for a number of years now. And a lot of that, I would say, is sort of grounded in the idea of what a post-industrial landscape is. The Binghamton area is good for it. Northeastern PA is good for it. It's the idea of you have past industry that's kind of picked up and left, and how nature or the landscape has sort of come back into the picture and has kind of melded or congealed in with what has been left over from an industrial past. It's just sort of what has drawn my interest and has kind of piqued my curiosity visually, and has basically just provided my subject matter and what I like to represent. The show at the Roberson is pretty much all more recent stuff, and it's the photo or the cut paper collage, and with a lot of the accompanying watercolors, which is a newer part of the process that I can get into sooner than later. I guess we can start with how I began working, and that started in college with this idea of the post-industrial landscape and kind of representing a lot of places in my hometown of Scranton. And I struck upon this idea of doing large-scale pastel drawings. It was a dry medium, and I kind of got away from paint. The wet medium just doesn't do it for me. And I thought there were, varying degrees of success. A lot of restrictions with using a chalk pastel, how to get that to hold onto paper, and how to have it hold up over time, which became an issue also. After graduating from U Arts, just kind of floundered around a little bit in terms of trying to paint, dabbling in some oil painting, and then getting into an oil pastel. It was a more direct mark making. I kind of feel like that paintbrush, it's a hindrance sometimes. It's this idea of there's a disconnect between you and the mark you're making, that I just feel that the directness of a pencil line, I just get my point across in a better way, in a more concise way, a more comfortable way for me. And so that turned into doing a lot of drawings in marker. It was a direct way to apply color. And if I can sneak out of my picture plane for a minute, I've been wanting to do this all day, but to give you a representation of what the marker drawings look like, I can kind of put this up over my face. And this creepy guy, this was back when I was a member of the Communist Party. The HUAC subcommittee found me out, and I was blacklisted for a number of years, but I got past that. This is a self-portrait with a beard, and it is all done in a variety of permanent markers. some of them more permanent than others. And so there was a lot of fleshy tones and all kinds of fun stuff going on in here that just has faded out after a number of years on me. So this piece is probably maybe 15 years old. Beard was terrible. It's a little picture of Jim Morrison to always remind me how bad some guys can look with a beard. So I always just kind of keep that in mind for myself. Another kind of setup I worked with for a while is, this is canvas mounted to board with a permanent marker and with a acrylic wash. And I did a number of these. There's probably 50 or 60 pieces, all landscapes from Scranton. So working sequentially like this just gave me the opportunity to come up with a number of locales and scenery to kind of give me an overall effect, a cumulative effect of how the area looks, and a way to represent the area with not one direct thing. So these can be sort of just kind of at a glance kind of images and kind of cast off places that I really feel like as a whole, as a big cohesive piece, it was a really good starting point to kind of shove off and really find my subject matter. And there's the beginnings of a way of how I wanted to convey that subject matter in a way that was comfortable for me, that I felt confident in, and at the same time could be unique, could be individualized in some way, I guess. So that went on for, I want to say 7 or 8 years at least. And then around 2010, the marker drawings were just starting to come to an end. I felt like I kind of expired how and really worked through as much as I could with the material and the medium. And I just thought they were flat, which I enjoyed, but began to lack just a pop, which is a word I use often to convey that idea of, it's almost a little bit of like an ethereal word for me, but if a piece pops, that means it has the right amount of punch, it has the right amount of give and take and push and pull and works in some way. And so for lack of a better word, we use this where I work a lot also in frame shop, is if a piece just pops, that means it works. That means it looks right, it feels right, and there's a harmony to it, a balance to it that it's kind of an intuitive sense, I'd say, in some way, that if something falls flat or falls short, it's usually because it lacks that, for lack of a better word, I would just call it its pop or its punch. And so almost on a whim, around the holidays one time, I just said, well, I have some construction paper, and how can I manipulate it? I like the colors of it, and I was really drawn to the marker work of the flattened colors, the flattened shapes, but heightened color, and how that kind of can be interesting in some ways. So I said, okay, what can I do with construction paper? Well, I can cut it out with an X-Acto knife and glue it together. And that's how it kind of started. I did a few portraits over a Christmas holiday. And the one guy I looked at in terms of having a visual reference for this was Alex Katz. And, Katz is known for these large scale paintings of kind of a flattened subject matter with very heightened color, a lot of natural scenes, a lot of close-ups of nature, and a lot of figurative work also that I'm just not as drawn to. I think he's a little bit more of an adept draftsman when it comes to his interpretations of nature rather than his figurative work. But early Alex Katz in the 1950s was doing this cut paper collage, basically. They were very almost rudimentary, but it had a nice effect. It was figures placed in a landscape, and the way the paper was layered upon itself to create that sense of depth, I found interesting. And he was probably the first person I was stealing some of his process to get to this cut paper collage. The early ones are tough. So what you're seeing basically at the show at the Roberson is about 7 or 8 years of experimenting with this and getting to a level of dexterity that the initial ones I found very problematic, that it was just a headache to try to get these cuts. Like I look at them now and say, like, what was so difficult about it? But boy, at the time, like, I really felt like I was pulling my hair out to try to get some of these things accomplished. And I look at them now and say, like, boy, this is very basic and rudimentary. Where I like the simplicity of it sometimes, but I just feel my newer stuff has much more of an overall depth to it in terms of how I can manipulate the colors and how I can create spatial relations and how I can kind of, pull out some details that were lacking in some of the early pieces. And so that's been going on for a number of years. And then I kind of got to, and I was working off of a lot of photographic references. So if you're out in a scene, I have a point and click camera. I can take a number of shots and then come home and kind of piece things together, take different elements of different photos and try to create this a individual image in some way. That has its limitations. Working from a photographic source or reference has inherent limitations because the way the spatial relations are skewed in a photograph. And so I realized I had to start going out and drawing on site to at least create my templates for the paper cuts. And that's been very fruitful in terms of keeping my energy levels up and keeping my enthusiasm for the process. And I'm very grateful that I've kind of stumbled upon this way of working, that it's really given me a really happy outlet for how I can make art. And so these days I have an 18 by 24 sketch pad. I use a Canson mixed media paper, kind of light. It's not as heavy as a watercolor paper, and it's rigid and sturdy enough to hold up to do basically a contour line drawing in pencil on site, and then take it home and then work from the photo references and kind of work up a watercolor and get some kind of template for how the cut paper collage will kind of feel or look. From that watercolor, and this is where it gets a little convoluted and a little bizarre to explain, but I take a clear sheet of plastic and I lay it over these watercolors. And then you can trace out all of your lines that will be the contour lines of your cut paper collage. So I can basically create almost like a stencil or a template to start the cutting process. This is a little weird here, and see if I can do this. So here's a new one. And this one side, it's kind of long. It's probably 3 sheets of 18 by 24 combined. But there's your big photo collage of what the scene looks like. It's a beehive. It's nearby here. And so then there's your watercolor study. And then all your shapes wind up being like this. Everybody gets glued together. And that's how it's all put together. So that's basically the process, and that's the material. And the one thing we had talked about prior to this, and to give us some gist of what we're going to be speaking about, I guess would be next would be subject matter, and how I pick and choose, and what my subject matter is, and what I'm drawn to, and basically what kind of story I'm telling through my images, and what I'm trying to convey. And the bulk of that goes back to being a native of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and growing up there. And then living there for about 12 years after college. And the idea of living in a, small to a mid-sized city that is, it's urban, it's industrialized, but it has a real proximity to the rural and the natural world. Scranton is in a valley, so it's bordered by mountains on its east and west sides. There's a decent sized tributary of the Susquehanna River that cuts right through town. the Lackawanna River that has two tributaries of its own that meet up with the Lackawanna right in Scranton, Leggett's Creek and Roaringbrook Creek. In Scranton, it's pronounced Leggett's Crick, for all of you that are fans of improper local vernaculars. And so that's the difference, how you differentiate in town. There's Roaringbrook Creek and Leggett's Crick. I had a science teacher explain that to me once, so I'll take that as fact. So again, growing up in this environment that has that kind of duality of an urban setting, slightly metropolitan, I wouldn't really want to go that far. But again, just the way Binghamton is in terms of, relatively same population size. That's 70,000 people in a city that had a pretty booming industrial past with a lot of nice architecture and with a lot of natural attributes to a kind of accompany all those man-made things. And the idea that a lot of these man-made structures have been kind of left to the wayside, and nature has taken over, especially in Scranton with our mining industry has left so much industrial waste and industrial waste areas that have been, for lack of a better word, just almost reclaimed by the landscape in some way. And what has come back and what has sprouted in spite of all of its pollution. And I don't dwell on that environmental aspect of it. I just kind of take it as a given that these things have been done, and it's not my really role to judge too much. And I'm not being preachy about environmentalism or anything, but sometimes, you're conveying that message that, yeah, this is a pretty dilapidated scene and this river is kind of polluted. And there's also an inherent beauty in a lot of that. There's a beauty not only in the decay of the landscape or a decay of structures and the buildings, but there's a beauty in the return of nature, how they coexist. And some kind of those chunky, rusty settings have their appeal. There is an inherent beauty to them that I always try to capture, strive for. In association with being in the woods, that was a part growing up in Scranton that continues to this day, that I enjoy hiking. And that was kind of a thing that I learned at home, was just, this idea of going for walks and going for hikes, getting some kind of understanding of what's around you in terms of birds and trees and amphibians and reptiles and all that kind of fun stuff, without being much of a hunter or fisherman. And so I meet a lot of like-minded people who are out in the woods, and they always say, well, do you hunt? Do you fish? I say, no, I'm kind of walking around out here. The one activity I have picked up over the years is kayaking. And that's been a great opportunity to be a little bit more of an active observer than compared to just going for a drive and seeing all these kind of scenes. I feel a little bit of a closer attachment or relationship to a lot of places by kind of passing through them on kayak trips. We go on some overnight trips throughout the summertime, and we've covered the bulk of the Susquehanna River from Cooperstown down to Harrisburg, the Shenango, the Chemung, and the Delaware, a couple other oddball things in Pennsylvania. This past summer, we're back in the Juniata River, which is below State College, Pennsylvania, in the center of PA. And especially for the pieces in the Roberson show, a lot of those scenes, that was my first introduction to a lot of those landscapes, was passing through there on a kayak trip, especially that Peach Bottom Dam next to the milk factory. We had a nice fun time trying to portage around that without too much information. We kind of got yelled at by a fisherman saying, hey, get off the water. And so that's why that was one of the scenes that just kind of had an appeal for me. Same with the convergence of the two rivers right behind the museum. I just thought, well, it's a nice location for a piece that could be in this show because it's, proximity to the museum. But I've pretty much been right there on a trip, where if you finish a trip right where the rivers meet, which is a nice thing. And so that's just another avenue for me in terms of finding subject matter.
Hey,
And
Joe.
I guess,
Oh, sorry. Somebody has a question in
jump
relation.
right in. Somebody
Yeah.
else talk.
Um, Joshua asks, have you ever gone back to any of the sites you've done cut paper pieces of earlier in your career to see how they've changed over time? And
Yeah.
have you done any new pieces to show those changes?
I have a couple places that I just have always gravitated to, going all the way back to some places like even in high school. So there's 3 pieces at the Roberson show of the West Mountain Sanatorium. It was an old tubercular home, rest home, for lack of a better word. And it's up on top of a hillside overlooking the city. And it was basically just a recuperation place that you would just go there and rest, for lack of a better word, if you had TB. And that went part and parcel with the coal mining industry and the effects of mining. And by the 60s and early 70s, it shut down, and then it achieved that kind of status as that iconic mansion on the hill that is, for lack of a better word, is iconic, and you find it in American literature and in cinema. I would say Binghamton, with you guys, you have your Binghamton State Hospital, which is, very, very grand and real magnificent place compared to where this West Mountain Sanatorium was. By the time I was seeing, it was a pretty ramshackled, old Gothic-y looking kind of house on a hill with some accompanying structures that were more almost like along the lines of dormitories. So that became like a high school drinking spot. And it just had this appeal of an eerie, kind of a creepy place that had a draw for a lot of kids. And I watched that decline from the late 90s. I was doing some photography work there when I was at Keystone College in the late 90s. At the University of the Arts, I was doing some paintings from there and some pastels from there. Early 2000s, I did a bunch of photo collage work as the building literally fell in upon itself. That roofs were falling off. The whole front facade of the building fell off, so you can see this great. You can see the entire valley because the whole front of the building fell off. And I finally got around to going up there and doing some watercolor studies and some good sketches up there. And I thought, great, I have this new process down pat. I have this location that I really enjoy. And I can start I got 3 decent sketches out of there. And I was really hot to trot about doing some more. And I went back about 2 weeks later, back up to Scranton, and they had begun tearing it down. There's bulldozers up there, and the whole place is leveled, and they've put a couple modular homes on this lot. And so that's a part of the appeal of the work for myself, is this idea of you're trying to represent some things for the sake of posterity. There's a lament that the time is past for these places, but their time is up at the same token. So yeah, I would say there are a number of scenes that, and especially with landscapes, there's a couple particular swimming holes that I've always enjoyed that I've just gone back to repeatedly and still do, and they still have a draw, and they still have an appeal to me that I could almost sketch at some of these places nonstop, and whether it's seasonal changes or, I don't want to say geologic changes, because we're not along that long, but we're not around for that kind of thing. But yeah, just changes in general to the scenes. How's that for an answer?
That's a pretty good answer. Also, Joshua asks, it'd be great to see the tools you use, if possible.
Yeah. I'm here at everything. What the first couple I did, and this is how backwards I am sometimes, is like, I figured, okay, I can cut things with an X-Acto knife, and that makes sense. But I was using like a board, and I was ruining X-Acto blades. And like, I went to the craft store one time, and I realized they sell these lovely boards that are made out of rubber. They're for quilting, they're for drafting, they're for anything. And boy, you can cut into them and it's not going to ruin your X-Acto blades. It's like mind-boggling. I just felt like I spent 3 or 4 months really, really having a headache cutting these things out. And I realized I could be making my life a heck of a lot easier if I just started getting some of the right equipment. And that's par for the course with me. I kind of have to be hit over the head with some things sometimes to get things right. I'm kind of fumbling around for my good X-Acto knife here. It's floating around my table someplace. But I just, here it is. This guy, some people make a big deal out of your tools and stuff, but I don't. I may go through one of these in about 2 years or so. It kind of falls apart. You tape it for a while and it keeps working. So I just haven't changed it yet, but I don't have like a real sentimental attachment to the tools. Everything's fairly utilitarian. And if it goes, I'm perfectly okay with it. There is a comfort level, just a familiarity with it, I would say, for lack of that. I kind of stick to the same things. Pencils for pencil drawing. For the sketches, I work with an HB. It's just a middle ground in terms of the graphite. In terms of, the B's seem to get too soft, smudge too easily. The H's are just too brittle and don't give you enough of a line. Where an HB is just kind of like a middle ground. They give you a fairly strong line for a pencil drawing. Paper, I guess, is the biggie. And same thing, just trial and error and trying to figure out a happy medium and what works. When I started doing these in Scranton, and that goes back to another part is when you're up there and limited resources in terms of art supplies. And I'm not talking now because you can buy anything and everything from Amazon. So I'm saying like pre-advent of real internet use for everybody. We had a Michael's and an AC Moore, and even they were fairly new. That was like, oh great, they have these craft stores. And so they have a scrapbooking section. And I went shopping for some construction paper and I realized they have this entire scrapbooking section. It's for middle-aged ladies who scrapbook. You take photos and you fill scrapbooks, and the paper is basically just as a decorative background, or you can cut it up and do whatever. I never really explored scrapbooking too much because I'm always in that aisle and I'm wary of others in there. So I try to just get in and get out. But it's acid-free. It's 8.5 by 11. It's 12 by 12. There's a decent selection of colors. Right now, I think Michael's is carrying a Martha Stewart brand, which I think is a little bizarre sometimes. It's not bad. Since I've been in Philadelphia, there's a few decent art supply stores, which have just been like an eye opener sometimes. That these other things are out there, and I found a couple a little bit more hoity-toity brands of paper. This Canson makes a nice one. And I would say what I most enjoy, the best part about it, I guess, is there's a much broader range of subtle colors that I wasn't getting at your big box store craft stores. And that's been great in terms of more natural greens, just a great variety of earth tones that can really affect the overall look of the piece. That if I was just dealing with some really hot or poppy colors, you couldn't create a mood sometimes. Everything, I once had a professor who wasn't too thrilled about the cut paper collage of mine say it, you're really making everything look like sunny days in Florida because you're using these very vibrant colors. But we went back and forth on that. I wasn't offended. But yeah, with the Philly art supply stores, I've come up with a decent range and tonal shifts and changes that have really worked out well for me. Glue, last thing, I guess. Cut the paper, an X-Acto knife, and it all gets glued together with Tombo's Mono liquid glue. real simple, water-based. And the best part about this is there's this pin-sized nib that can give you a very narrow amount of glue, so things don't get too sloppy. When I look at some of the earlier stuff, I'm always a little upset about how sloppy some of them can be with glue. And I'm always like, oh man, there's like this kind of glue smudge on there. And I think that's just a part of just getting a little bit more adept and having a better dexterity with the material. They're cleaner, they're more precise, they're more concise. Okay.
That's it for questions for now. If anybody has any questions, be sure to type them in the chat.
I'm trying to think what else I can show some more pieces here to further kind of talk about the subject matter and why that's important for me. And again, it's this idea of living in a setting that kind of has the duality of industrial developed and rural natural. Scranton is very, very good for those kind of scenes. We have a lot of junkyards. There's coal mine waste areas. And it just sort of, for me, there's always been that appeal, especially growing up and living in proximity to them. That my home was, where I grew up was pretty much right on the edge of town. So you can walk 50 yards and there was a junkyard, which then walked up a mountain to a set of cliffs kind of a thing. And that's where I'm still at today on a lot of my pieces. And I'm still roaming these same kind of areas and mining them for scenes. The question just popped up that how long does a piece take? It kind of varies depending on my work week, how rainy days are, how much yard work is involved with what season it is. But on the whole, to start with the watercolor goes fast. I stand at a location and I can draw it on site and get all my information that I kind of want to put into the piece in a very rapid sketch. And that takes probably 10, 15 minutes. I get it home. I try to work up the watercolor in one sitting, which probably takes a few hours to get, like each of these watercolors behind me, a fairly large scale. A lot of them are, the 18 by 48. They could take a few days to kind of set all the colors in there. Once that's done, and then you do this whole process of transferring it with the clear plastic. I'd like to say I can get a piece worked up in about a week. And so you're looking maybe 25 hours to get a piece about 3/4 of the way finished. I usually don't finish things all in one shot to kind of keep my own motivation in some way. I get them worked up to a point where I'm nearly satisfied. I know I have a lot of things resolved, but my enthusiasm begins to wane in some way. And it's always better to then, I feel, to just set it aside, start something fresh, start something new, and then go back in after a number of pieces are worked up to that point, and then start over. I feel it helps in terms of if there's some areas that are bothering me, I can kind of mull it over. I can kind of work through some issues in my next pieces. And then, so when I go back to that with a set of fresh eyes on it, I can really say, okay, well, I didn't like how this was going, or this should be this way, or what needs to be fixed, or what doesn't need to resolve it in its entirety. So again, everything I would say is that, it's a work week to probably get one done. I'd say there's every bit of between 25 to 40 hours at least in a piece. Smaller things I have some systems that have just worked over the years in terms of cutting down some of that, all that labor intensive kind of stuff, or having all these kind of questions in your head and you don't know what's going to work. But I feel like I'm always constantly trying to streamline the process. To number one, just to have more output. But I think that it leads to, I enjoy making them more. There's less struggle. You know what I mean? That I think that struggle is always a part of making art, but it's not all about struggle. A lot of it has to be some kind of pleasure for you in the process of making it, or some kind of joy in making it.
How has creating been through, I guess, COVID? Because a lot of artists will talk about either they are creating a lot or creating nothing at all.
I'm like anybody else. I mean, this is just bizarre, right? And it's strange times, and we haven't seen this in 100 years, and that's one of the things I'm trying to find some solace in is how they handled this 100 years ago, and the same issues that they had then they're having now in terms of getting everybody on board with how we should all act. I was home starting in mid-March. On one level, I was sort of like, I tried to stay away from, you would see that on a lot of social media, how artists are responding in the time of COVID, and virtual shows about it. And, a lot of people just crying the blues about they can't get to their studio space. They're running out of materials. They don't like being cooped up. I had none of those issues. This was fantastic. You got to realize that when you've been going to work for a long time and the governor of your state tells you to stay home and we're going to pay you, this is mind-boggling. This is what, I mean, this is what I've been waiting for. I found it fruitful. I found it a little nerve-wracking and a little bizarre to watch the news every day. And you're watching the press conference at noon every day, and Fauci's out there, and Dr. Birx and the president is out there, and like, kind of weird, but I found it very enjoyable to be home for the spring season in the yard. The day everything hit, I was in downtown Philadelphia, and the mayor came on and said, we're going to shut the city down at 5 o'clock today. So I left work and went right to 3 different art supply stores to kind of load myself up, not knowing how long all this was going to drag on for, but just saying, hey, I'm going to go stock up on supplies. So that was probably the best thing I did, was just say, okay, I'm going to go run out and spend X amount of dollars on paper, basically, just to hold myself through. And it really worked out well. I mean, I'm not looking forward to a second wave or anything, but I would love to stay home again. It was very just, and to stay home without that anxiety of I should be doing more, or only have a week's off work for vacation, and what am I doing and how am I being productive through this? That it was a nice release. And I would do it again. I know that sounds a little bizarre or a little cold. I'm not cold-hearted, but again, I've met other people who say this in terms of working, that it was just thrilling to not have to go to work. That lots of people go to work for their entire lives without a break, right? And so that we just had this forced break where everyone got to breathe a little bit and realize, what, I just go to work, and what does that do for my sanity or my health?
Another question from Joshua: are there places you want to visit to do art for that you haven't been to yet?
Yeah, there's always a running list of places that I'm meaning to get to that I haven't gotten to yet. I've started getting to, and things didn't work out, or just when I came back with some sketches that I didn't have the success that I wanted, so it's going to take going back to. But there's always this just like a running tab of locations and sort of ideas. I don't speak with a lot of other artists. I'm not in a lot of artistic circles of what others are doing. But I just heard the guy who shoots my digital images for me in Scranton. He's a commercial photographer, and we're talking about a recent series of works that he's done. And he just mentioned, he's like, I've had this, kicking around in my head for a number of years, that this body of work that he's working on now. And I kind of like, yeah, like that's it. You have these things that kind of, they're either on the back burner, or you're striving to get them immediately, or there's just things that just kind of are stewing, and they come out eventually. I don't try to force it. Sometimes I have anxiety about, I should be trying to capture some things before seasonal changes, before things are torn down. So when I kind of see some of that happening, I'll get my act together and say, okay, I'm going to go, either try to get up north or concentrate on trying to get some images prepped together. So yeah, there are plenty. I would say, like, one that really jumps out at me that it's like I can't seem to get myself to is there's a section of the Lackawanna River just outside of Scranton where the river is orange, and it's orange from the iron oxide that is spewing out of a mine kind of leakage area under the river. So the river is green for 25 miles, and all of a sudden the whole stretch from Old Forge to where it meets into the Susquehanna River, it's orange. The water is orange. The rocks are orange. There's like an orange crust on everything, and it's a very unique landscape, and it's a very strange thing to see. That I'm always saying, well, what season works best for that? Do I want all the trees green around it? Is autumn better because all the trees are then orange and rust colors and stuff? Or do you want it during the snow because everything is white around it? So I haven't gotten there yet. And a couple other, there's a bunch of other tucked away places that I'm always saying, well, I got to get back there. Or I went there a few years ago and nothing really came out of it. So they're on my list to get back to. Rocky Glen Amusement Park is another one. Same kind of thing with a lot of my other places. It had its heyday as a place to be. It was a big amusement park in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and shut down in the late 1970s, early 80s. And then now it's just a lake with the old macadam pathways of what's left of an amusement park. No real buildings, no real machinery, just the macadam paved walkways and some foundation walls that were a part of the whole setup. But again, great place to mine some history of a place. There's some character of a place.
What would you tell kids, this is from Linda, what would you tell kids aspiring young artists about developing their creative side?
I would tell all young kids to go to school for accounting and, get a nice career, get a steady job, health insurance provided by your employer, and leave art to kids who have trust funds. I say it's sort of in jest and sort of true sometimes, that it's the whole thing. This is like that William Whalen song, like, you don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. You let them be doctors and lawyers and such. There's not a lot of glory in this. And it's almost like a pursuit of passion. So if you feel that urge and you feel that kind of drive, that it's maybe you should come up with a healthy way to enjoy what you do, but also try to get a little something for yourself in some way. And starving artists, it's a tough racket. There's not a real job field for being an artist. And that's not to say that going to art school, there are a number of careers. If you go into an art school, I mean, if you have if you have that kind of passion or penchant for drawing or an eye for drawing, that lots of people wind up in an art school in industrial design or graphic design or animation. So there are careers out there. But in terms of fine art, studio art, it's difficult, and it takes a number of years. I've been out of school for nearly 20 years, and I'm still finding my way, and I'm still getting there. So I don't think I would ever actually deter somebody from it, but I would have to insist upon that person being fairly resolute in their motivations. And I can say that from experience of being in an art school setting and watching. There are 20 people in my painting department at the University of the Arts. I'd say there's probably 3 or 4 that are working in the arts right now. You know, that were in the painting program that are still, you know, in that kind of thing. Now, the other majors that came out of the different programs at the University of the Arts, you know, graphic designers. It's a very creative field and a very lucrative and fruitful field for a lot of people. Architecture, industrial design. Like I said, there are other ways of expressing yourself creatively that can probably have more fruitful occupations involved with it.
Good answer.
I
Interesting
know
answer.
it's a little,
Different
it's
answer.
just, that's partly why I'm not sold on teaching on the college level. It's a little, you know, I know some people who are in it and they have apprehensions about it in this day and age, saying like, it's a little tough to go try to tell 18 to 22-year-olds, do this, do that, and without any kind of safety net for what comes next, especially with the cost of college these days. That's a tough pill to swallow when there's just no job field out there, and you have, you know, the way colleges are operated today to amass an amazing amount of student loan debt, and without any kind of guarantees on a return. But again, for the people that are in it, I had this issue when my father called a guy when I was looking to go to art school. My family isn't, you know, there's a couple, I have a bunch of aunts and uncles who are in some creative fields, but my parents are fairly straight-laced people. And they said, our kid's going to go to art school. Like, what's he doing? Like, we knew he enjoyed drawing and he's had some creative skills and blah, blah, blah. And so my father talked to an artist that he knew in the Scranton area, and the guy basically he didn't deter him from allowing me to go to art school. But he said, you know, if he's passionate about it, then you can't hold him back from it. And at the end of it, he'll probably be happier if he's allowed, if his intentions are honest and this is what he wants, he'll be a happier person in the long run for it. And I would say that, backpedal on some statements I just made, but I don't know how I would function if I was just an accountant. I would need some other outlets. And I think everyone needs some outlets in life. And I've really found an outlet for myself that is just all encompassing for me. I find it fulfilling, and I find it challenging. And it's just a lot more gratifying than watching television every night.
I think we have time for one more question, and it's from Joshua. And this is a very important question, Joe. Where did you eat when you were doing your art in Binghamton?
I'll tell you straight off. There's a little backstory to this. My other half, my better half, Linda, she's a native Scrantonian, but at the same time, her father was employed by IBM. So for a time in her childhood, she was actually raised just outside of Binghamton. And she has a favorite place called Lupo's. And that's all she wants is Lupo's. Now, we've been to this other one that's closer to the museum, but it just doesn't cut it. She wants the real deal one, like on the, what's that, Johnson City or Endicott? You know what I'm talking about here? There's one that's a little bigger and it looks a little classier, but she really enjoys the one it almost looks like an old drive-through thing. And I'm pretty sure that's the Lupo's Char Pit. That's her authentic. And she also likes Tony's Italian restaurant. We're very spoiled on it. We're Italian restaurant snobs, from being from northeastern Pennsylvania and having some Italian heritage for both of us. And Tony's does it for her. I'm not completely sold. I enjoyed it, but I'd still take some North Scranton Italian restaurants instead.
All right, Joe, where can they find you? Online.
Oh, I'm always around. I'm on Walnut Street in Philadelphia a few days a week, and I'm also available at josephopshinsky.com, and that is my fancy website. There's new work going up pretty much as we speak. I'm getting some new stuff photographed very shortly to put the 2020 page on the website. Instagram is Joseph Opshinsky Fine Art, I'm pretty sure. Same with Facebook. Instagram, I wasn't all for it. I'm still a little wary of social media, but I am kind of hooked on this thing, and it gives me lots of anxiety and gives me something to strive for every week. By Wednesdays are watercolor Wednesdays, and Saturdays are sneak preview Saturdays. So I have like regimented where I have to get stuff done all week long to accommodate. Wednesday has to be a new watercolor, and Saturday has to be hopefully a new cut paper. Sometimes I cheat and sneak a watercolor in there. And other than that, I hope I don't have to be anywhere. I'm waiting for Governor Wolf to say, stay home.
Well, that sounds good. Well, we can't wait to see more of your work. And I think if that's it.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for taking some time out of their day today. And again, I know it's some crazy times for people to be taking time out of their day, so I appreciate it. And go out and see the Roberson. There's a few new pieces out there that I swapped in at the end of August, September, especially that new Binghamton State Hospital, the New York State Inebriate Asylum.
It's huge.
80 inches long, 24 inches tall, and it was a lot of fun to do. I think it's a nice, big, imposing piece. So,
well, thank you so much for your time, Joe.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I hope everybody has a safe and wonderful evening. Bye.
Good night.